Governor Scott Walker. The Republican presidential hopeful spoke in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, earlier today to lay out his plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. This is 45 Minutes.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cast Screw Machine Products. We are a proud Minnesota precision manufacturing facility. We are in our 70th year of business. We make a lot of the parts that you see behind me here: nuts, bolts, screws, bearings, shafts. The industries we serve are the lawn care industries, agriculture, folks like that. We are honored today to have Scott Walker and his campaign here today to unveil his alternative to Obamacare. It's a little overwhelming as well. I'd like at this time to introduce our Speaker of the House, Kurt Dowd. He was first elected to the House in 2010, elected Speaker of the House in 2014. He is a private pilot and he is single, girls. So, Speaker of the House, Kurt Dowd.
Thank you, Steve. Quite an introduction. Thank you so much, Steve, for hosting us here. It's absolutely a wonderful facility that you run, and we're so proud to have you as an employer here in the state of Minnesota, so thank you for hosting us today. I'm very excited to have Governor Scott Walker in Minnesota. Governor Walker is a bold, conservative reformer, and he's brought unbelievable policies that have turned around the state of Wisconsin. When he took over in the state of Wisconsin, it was a mess. They had a $4 billion deficit, had lost jobs, and had an unemployment rate above 8%. Governor Walker came in, lowered taxes to spur job growth, put reforms in place that eliminated waste, fraud, and abuse from state government, more than $300 million worth of waste, fraud, and abuse eliminated, and really turned the state of Wisconsin around. We're really proud of the work that he's done there, and I'm very proud that he's come to Minnesota to announce his Obamacare reforms. There's really no better place than here in Minnesota to announce these reforms. We have seen the worst of Obamacare here in Minnesota. 140,000 Minnesotans have lost their health coverage because of Obamacare. People have lost the choice that they had. In some cases, in many parts of the state, they have only one option for health coverage. And frankly, all the while, during the worst of the worst, Democrats gave the Obamacare executives in Minnesota bonuses to reward them for this work. We need new, bold reforms like Scott Walker has brought to Wisconsin, here in Minnesota, and all over the country. If you followed the news yesterday, you know that Scott Walker is ready for the task and that he's unintimidated. Scott Walker is the bold reform leader that we need, not only here in Minnesota, but the entire country. Please join me in welcoming the next President of the United States, Governor Scott Walker.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and not just for the introduction, but Kurt's done a spectacular job here in the state of Minnesota. I was pleased to be with you earlier in the year in the Capitol with your caucus. Appreciate your leadership. Appreciate your leadership for our team here in Minnesota. We're going to compete for the caucuses here, and we're pleased to have your leadership. We know the grassroots is going to make a huge difference. And I want to thank all the employees here at CAS. Thank you so much for hosting us, not just here, but it was nice to see a bit of a tour. I was kidding on the tour. I've done so many manufacturing tours as a governor. I know where not to stick my finger and where not to turn off the light curtains and all that kind of good stuff along the way. It's great to be with seeing some of the CNC machines and other things that are so important to literally fueling the economy here in Minnesota, but across the great country. So thanks for having us here, and thanks to everybody else, all the friends and supporters of CAS for being here and hearing a little bit about what we want to share today. As the speaker mentioned, we're going to talk about Obamacare, and really when you think about it, I just want to start and point out that America is a can-do kind of country. We just got a government in Washington that can't quite seem to get the job done. Washington, as I call it, 68 square miles surrounded by reality. When I think about Washington, I got to tell you, when I talk to people all across this country, people all across America are fed up with Washington. And I feel your pain. I'm fed up with Washington too. When I think about this, we were told by Republican leaders during the campaigns last year that we just needed a Republican Senate to be elected to repeal Obamacare. Well, here we sit. You know, both chambers of the United States Congress have been controlled since January by Republicans. And yet there's not a bill on the president's desk to repeal Obamacare. I want to be perfectly clear. Americans want more than just campaign promises. They want results. Actions speak louder than words. It's something I know well about. I get it. I understand it. As Kurt mentioned, I'm not intimidated. Even yesterday at the Iowa State Fair on that soapbox, I was not intimidated by the people that came there. But long before we took on the big government union bosses in my state, long before we took on the liberal special interests from Washington, we took on some of the established in my own party. You see, back in 2010, when I was thinking about running for governor, I did so because I was upset at that time with the direction my state was headed. I thought it was headed in the wrong direction. So I wanted to do something about that. So we ran. And then about a week after the election, state capitol, we got all the Republican lawmakers together, and I said to them that the voters had told us that they wanted us to be big and be bold. As you can imagine, at the time, there were some Republican lawmakers who were kind of uneasy with the idea of taking on the status quo. But I remember in that session, it was open to the public, I said to all those lawmakers, including some who were a little uneasy with challenging the status quo, I said, it's put up or shut up time. Simply put, I remember that was the headline. Walker says it's put up or shut up time, but it was important because we wanted to send a clear message out there. I heard what the voters had said. If we didn't do what we said we were going to do, they'd have every right to throw us out. So I was proud not long after taking office, literally the very day I took office, took the oath, and a moment or two later, I authorized our state to join the federal lawsuit against Obamacare on my very first day. And then we set out on a path of big, bold reforms. We took on the big government union bosses, and we won that battle. Then we fixed a $3.6 billion budget deficit. We cut taxes by $2 billion. We defunded Planned Parenthood long before any of those videos out there. We put in place a requirement to have a photo ID to vote in the state of Wisconsin. As we were talking about just as we were with the last building there, we now ensure that every adult in our state who's able to work must be able to pass a drug test before they get a welfare check. We did all those things. We went big and we went bold and we got results. We got results and we took action. In fact, in addition to on that very first day, authorizing the state to join the federal lawsuit against Obamacare, I also, not long after that, turned down a state exchange under Obamacare. And as you mentioned, Mr. Speaker, having looked at Minnesota or Maryland or Oregon, I'm glad, looking at the problems other states have with state exchanges, that I made that decision several years ago. And like my friends Rick Perry and Bobby Jindal, I turned down a Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. I got to tell you, that was kind of tough in a blue state like Wisconsin. There were even some Republicans that wanted us to grab the money. But we turned it down because we knew how difficult it would be to repeal Obamacare and put patients and families back in charge of their own health care decisions if states were adding to it, were expanding underneath it. In my state, even without taking that expansion, we showed that we could get results. I'm proud to say in the state of Wisconsin, for the first time in our history, everyone living in poverty is covered under Medicaid. We took everyone above poverty and transitioned them into the marketplace. And we did so in a way that still protects our taxpayers. Even the non-partisan Kaiser Family Foundation looked at what we did and said that Wisconsin was the only state out of all the states that didn't take the Medicaid expansion, the only state that did not have a coverage gap. In other words, we got results while still staying true to our common sense conservative principles. If innovative reforms like that can work in a blue state like Wisconsin, there's no doubt they can work for America. I just have no doubt going forward they can work for America. And like I did in my state, I'm going to tell you, I'm willing to stand up against anyone, including members of my own party. I'm willing to stand up against anyone to get the job done. We're not intimidated. We're not intimidated. The reason I say this is because to me, talk is cheap in the world of politics. In our case, we fought, we won, we got results. We did all that in a state that hasn't gone Republican for president since 1984. So not the easiest of circumstances, but we weren't intimidated. We didn't back down. We did what was right for the people of our state, for the people who are paying the tax bills going forward. And now we've got a plan for America I want to share with you here this morning. We've got a plan. It's simple to begin with. It's as simple as this. It starts out with the premise that on my very first day as President of the United States, I will send legislation to the Congress to once and for all repeal Obamacare entirely. And then, along with that, we're going to replace it in a way that puts patients and families, your families, back in charge of your health care decisions. Pretty simple idea. We call it the Day One Patient Freedom Plan. And I want to walk through it with you this morning. As I mentioned, the first part is just repealing Obamacare entirely. And some people say, well, how are you going to do that? You know, you've got a Congress out there. Well, it's pretty simple. To me, the reason we make sure this happens right away, because we've got to repeal Obamacare entirely, lock, stock, and barrel. And we've got to repeal every part of it, including the parts that Nancy Pelosi didn't bother to read before she voted on it. We've got to repeal it all. And I've talked to reformers like Paul Ryan and Tom Price and Mike Lee and others out there. You know what? They're ready. They're ready to work with us to pass reforms as soon as possible, ASAP. But we need to have a little bit of an incentive out there to do that. And so for me, the great way to motivate the Congress to pass the reforms we're talking about is to make sure they have to live under the same Obamacare rules that the rest of America has been put under over the last few years, right? So on my very first day, I will issue an executive order that will pull back on the special deal that President Obama provided for Congress. You know, they kind of got pulled out of this like they often exempt themselves out of other things when it comes to other laws out there. We're going to do an executive order that gets rid of the deal that President Obama put in place, the special deal for Congress, and make them live under the same conditions. I think once they're susceptible to the Obamacare premium increases that so many Americans have been under over the last few years, I have a pretty good idea that's going to light a fire under Congress to get things moving right away. A lot of candidates talk about repealing Obamacare. We've actually got a plan to make sure Congress acts on our reforms right away, because they're going to have to live under the same rules that everyone else in America does going forward. So the next part is once we get established that we're going to repeal Obamacare in its entirety, the next screen up here will show you what we're going to do. And that's about ensuring affordability and accessibility for everyone when it comes to health insurance. We want affordable and accessible health insurance for everyone in America. First off, we'll have lower premiums. And the reason for that is once you repeal Obamacare and you get rid of all those regulations, and as part of our overall plan, once you encourage more competition when it comes to insurers and healthcare providers, you're going to see healthcare premiums go down for everyone, including people who get it at places like this, that get it through their employer, like the employees here at Cass do. We're going to see a reduction in premiums out there. That's good for everyone out there. Secondly, for those out there who might not get their health insurance today or in the future from their employer, we've got an option there as well. We provide a tax credit that's tied into age. It's not tied into income, so it applies across the board. As people get older, it goes up. We've got a great tax credit out there that will help people, no matter whether it's someone who maybe is working part-time and going to school, or maybe somebody else who decides they want to start their own new business, a small business. They're looking for a way to buy health insurance and they don't have it through their employer. This gives them an affordable way, or a way to get an affordable health care plan. Along with that, something we apply for everybody out there, and you all know this at Cass because you've got, as I understand, health savings accounts. We provide, in addition to that, $1,000 of a refundable tax credit to put right into HSAs, to put into health savings accounts. And we lift the limits. We're raising the limits in terms of the contribution limits for both individuals and families to put into health savings accounts. And we allow you to pass it on to your children and other family members. The idea being we want you to be able to control more of your own money. Simple concept. You're going to do more to manage your health care and your health, not just your health care, if you actually have control over those dollars. This is a part of our plan. It's all about freedom. It's putting freedom back in the hands of patients and families to make decisions about your health care and about your money. In addition to that, you also see up there, besides the credits and the incentives and lowering that we'll see in premiums out there, we allow people to buy health insurance anywhere, in any state out there. In the past, you've been restricted over state lines. We allow you to buy it anywhere, wherever you think is the best spot. If you want to buy it outside of those who get it from their employer, for that matter, employers can do that as well. We allow you to buy it anywhere, in any state. And then finally, we make sure, this is really important, because while we're repealing Obamacare entirely, we want to make sure that one of the concerns that I've heard across this country, I've certainly heard in my state, is we want to make sure that people who have pre-existing conditions, that you're not going to get bumped off your coverage, or you're not going to have to face huge increases just because of a pre-existing condition or just because you get sick. That's something we do under this plan to make sure that you as Americans are taken care of. So that's the first phase, ensure affordable and accessible health care insurance options for everyone. The next thing is make health care more efficient, more effective, and more accountable by empowering the states. Two parts to that, real simple. One is send the ability to oversee health care insurance back to the states. So that's one of those where the Speaker and I know this, but I know across the country. It doesn't matter Democrat, Republican, light. It is more effective, more efficient, and definitely more accountable when you send power out of Washington and you send it back to the state level. That's what we do under this plan. We say, in terms of overseeing health care in our states, have it done at the state level. Much more effective. And then on top of that, we want to reform Medicaid. We want to reform Medicaid, and that means fixing it and sending it back to the states. As a governor, I've seen for years, we've tried all different ways of doing that. And as I mentioned, one of the things I'm proud of is even under Obamacare, we were able to find a way to make sure that every person living in poverty, for the first time in my state's history, everyone living in poverty was covered. And we did it without taking the so-called free federal money. Because you see, there is no such thing as free federal money. We're all taxpayers. We're the ones who pay for it out there. But we need to put those abilities to reform and innovate at the state level. Much more effective. If you want to make sure that truly needy people get the care that they need, you need to send that power and responsibility back to the states, where states can be more innovative and where they're more likely to get the job done because they're caring for the people right here in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, in Iowa, in places all across this great country. So part of this is just taking power from Washington and sending it back to the states. The next thing after that is talking about, well, how do we improve things? Well, we increase the quality and choice through innovation. And there's a couple different ways to do that out there. We allow people, consumers, to go out and pool together and purchase health care that way. That's one of your options out there. Could be a group of farmers, group of small business owners, group of individuals out there say, we want another option from the choices we have right now. We allow people to pool their resources and go out there and purchase health care insurance options together. That's what this plan's all about. It's about giving people more freedom. We also put in place incentives for wellness, because we know there's a lot of great employers out there that are working with their employees on wellness programs that actually increase our health. That's beyond just talking about health care cost. It's actually improving our health out there. And you do that, you deal with chronic diseases and things of that nature, that actually help lower health care cost, as opposed to the alternatives, which we're not there yet, but under Obamacare eventually lead to rationing. We want to go down that path. We want people to live healthier and happier lives, and this allows for employers and others to participate in wellness programs. We also put in place reforms for long-term care services. We reform the process for long-term care. That's particularly important for those of us in the middle class, because there's a whole lot of concern, understandable concern, about financial stability when you think about long-term care needs for your family. And we put in place changes so that you can have more stability and more confidence about long-term, not just for yourself, but for those in your family. And we expand, we allow for more options out there, so that there are more options so that you can provide long-term care in people's homes, not just having to go to certain places, but more options, more abilities to provide long-term care in people's homes going forward. That's something we've heard time and time again. We know it in our own family with folks we've worked with over the years. And then finally, we want to make sure that we provide an incentive for states to pursue lawsuit reform as applies to medical procedures. You see, I want healthcare professionals to go forward with procedures and tests and decisions that are based on medically necessary decisions, not based on trying to avoid the adverse effect of frivolous lawsuits. I think that's much more powerful. You say, hey, we're going to let our doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals make decisions based on the medical needs, not just on trying to avoid frivolous lawsuits by practicing defensive medicine out there. These are all things that will help us lower costs while continuing to increase our choices and push through innovation out there. And then a lot of people say, okay, well, this all comes together, but how are you going to pay for it? And how does that apply to how does it apply to Obamacare? Well, for us, it's important to have financial stability for ourselves and our families, but also for the taxpayers. So our plan, as I mentioned, whether it's with long-term care, whether it's giving people more options by those who get it through their employers, like here, seeing premiums go down, or people who don't have employer-based health care being able to get the tax credits that make it affordable for you and your family to get at affordable and reasonable health care, whether it's looking at putting more money in the health savings accounts. All those things are about putting more money in your pocket and giving you more control over your money. So this is good. This is good for families. This is good for patients. This is good for your financial stability. But collectively, for all of us, it's also good for our as taxpayers. Because you see, right now, we're not sustainable under Obamacare. And I'm proud to say that by repealing Obamacare entirely, not just bits and pieces of it, by repealing Obamacare entirely, we're getting rid of the spending and the taxes, which means this ends up being a tax cut of about $1 trillion. We get rid of all the taxes and all the spending, the $1 trillion of taxes that were involved in Obamacare. We take that back out. We give that back to the American people. We actually provide a little bit more relief on top of that, particularly through the HSAs. So we put more money back in the American people's hands. That's probably about one of the biggest tax relief plans we've had, pro-growth economic development tax relief plans we've had in the past some 40 years. That's going to have a dynamic and important impact on the nation's economy. But it's also important, as we think about Obamacare, you think about candidates talking about Obamacare and what they're going to do to repeal it and how to replace it. One, we're one of the few candidates who've actually laid a plan out, not just for how to repeal it, but also for what to do in its place. But also, we lay out the fact that when you talk about this, you want to make sure at a time when the nation is facing a critical financial crisis, when it comes to our debt and our deficit problems, that none of these plans that people may or may not talk about are going to add to that. I can tell you in this case, our plan is cost neutral. We pay for this, we pay for the credits and the other components by reforming the process by which the tax code treats some of the gold-plated health care plans out there, and by reforming and fixing Medicaid by sending it back to the states where it's more effective and more efficient and more accountable to the American people and to the people that are served by these programs at the state and local level. That is really important because we want to repeal Obamacare. And we want to put patients and families back in charge of your health care decisions, but we want to do so in a way that doesn't break the bank. In this case, it's cost neutral. Going forward, we found an effective way to do that that doesn't add to our debt and our deficit problems, provides massive tax relief, and puts ultimately all of you and all the rest of the people across America back in charge of their health care decisions. So this is the layout of the plan. We think it's a great plan. It's a great way to repeal Obamacare, to not just talk about it. You know, for a lot of folks, it's a good punchline in your speeches out there on the stump. We've actually now got a plan to give to the American people that shows exactly how we're going to repeal Obamacare, not just in saying it, not just hoping the Congress will pass it, but by putting in place that executive action that will force Congress to live under the same rules that everybody else has to live under Obamacare. We think that's the light, that's the fire under the Congress that gets them to act immediately. And I know there's a lot of great reformers that want to. There are others, kind of like some of the folks I had to deal with in the past, who might not want to. We're prepared to take anyone on, be it in the other party or our party, to get the job done. Because that's what the American people want. They don't just want campaign promises. They want you to deliver on those promises. I think one of the things... One of the things that makes us unique in this race, we don't just talk about things. We fight, we win, we get results, and we do it without compromising our common sense conservative principles. I think now more than ever, particularly when people are frustrated with Washington, that's what people want. And think about the contrast out there. We not only have a plan on the table to get Obamacare repealed, a plan for what we do to put patients and families back in charge of your health care decisions, to give you the freedom to make those decisions and to control your own money going forward. We also have a great contrast with Hillary Clinton. Because think about this. As bad as things have been under Obamacare, they'd only get worse under Hillary Clinton. I mean, think about all the problems we've had with Obamacare, but they came long after Hillary Clinton put this idea out. In the early 1990s, there was Hillary Care, long before there was Obamacare. Some of you too young to remember this, but back in the early 1990s, there was Hillary Care. And even in 2008, in the Democrat primary, Hillary Clinton, as a candidate back then, laid out a plan that included the federal mandate and many of the provisions that are now in Obamacare. And think how well that's worked. You know, we were told under Obamacare that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. That was PolitiFact's Lie of the Year nationally. Think about over all that time how many people have been dumped off of their health care insurance by their employer because of the pressures under Obamacare. Think about how premiums for many have gone through the roof. Kurt, you talked about some of the folks here who've lost coverage or seen premiums going up. Think about how many of us were told that this wasn't a tax, and yet we see the tax burden that's implied on this, both for individuals and for employers out there. Think of all the things that have been problematic about Obamacare. They only get worse under Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton had a much bigger vision and a much bigger goal than just what we see under Obamacare. And so voters in America, here in Minnesota and across this country, will have a clear choice next November. And I want to be that nominee who lays out a clear contrast. It says not just that we're against Obamacare, but here's what we're for, and here's how we make it happen, and here's how it's driven in a way that's about your freedom. It's not about more government. It's about getting government out of the way and putting freedom into your hands and the hands of the American people, putting freedom back into your hands and the hands of you and your families going forward. That's what this is all about. It's all about freedom. So if you want a candidate who's going to do something about Obamacare, who's actually going to get the Congress to repeal it, who's going to get the Congress to pass reforms, who's going to put in place reforms that actually put you and your families back in charge of your health care decisions, that let you control your money, you control your freedom going forward, then I'm your candidate. Because you see, 4 years ago, just like we thought about a little bit yesterday at the State Fair in Iowa, we took on over 100,000 protesters. We took on the big government union bosses. We took on the liberal special interests from Washington who spent all sorts of money and time and resources to take us out. And yes, we even took on some in our own party early on to say the voters of my state back then, back in 2010, sent a clear message. They were willing to make a change because they wanted big, bold reforms and they wanted results, and that's exactly what we gave them. If you give me a chance as your president, we'll make sure we don't just talk about things. We fight, we win, we get results, and we do it without compromising our common sense conservative principles out there. I think that's the difference in this race. And I appreciate you all coming out here today and listening to me because, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of people I meet across America who are just as frustrated, who are just as angry with Washington and even some of the Republican leaders in Washington as I am. But if it was just about anger, people would have checked out. They would have moved on. They would have become cynical and said, that's it with politics. What gives me hope is I haven't given up on America, and I don't think you have either. It's why you're here. It's why you're listening. It's why you're interested. What you want is people in Washington who actually listen to you, who talk like you, who think like you, who do the sorts of things you would do if you're in Washington. I may not be the flashiest of the folks. I may not have the pizzazz of people on the east or the west coast, but I hope you see not just here in Minnesota, but across America, I think like you think. My family lives like your family does. We want the same things that you do. And we're not going to back down. We've been tested in a way that no other candidate in this race has been tested. When we talk about what we're going to do to repeal Obamacare, we've got a plan to make it happen. We're not going to back down to anyone or any party. We're going to stand up for the American people and do what is right and just. And on this and every other issue, we're going to do what's right for you and your family. So with that, let's take some questions.
I've sold health insurance for over 35 years, and I see people crying at the table because premium increases or because of health conditions. I like a lot of what you lay out there, but I would say one thing. I do think underwriting has to be brought into the health insurance market again. And I'd encourage you to look at Minnesota's model with the Minnesota Comprehensive Health Association. We did allow people with uninsurable conditions to get health insurance. Now that model needs to be tweaked and there needs to be tax credits with it. But when you give all pre-existing conditions coverage with no health underwriting, the worst health conditions tend to gravitate to the best benefits, and ultimately it breaks the plan. So I'd encourage you to research that because I think Minnesota's model was a way of helping uninsureds without bankrupting the private insurance industry.
No, and a great point. And in fact, in Wisconsin, we had a similar program called HERPS, a high-risk insurance program out there. And unfortunately, in Obamacare, it forced us out of that. This plan would allow things like that to happen going forward, would allow things like that here in Minnesota and Wisconsin, elsewhere to go back. We've actually got a couple, some friends of ours who are small business owners who were getting their health insurance under that very plan. who then under Obamacare were making too much, not a lot, they're a middle-class family, but too much to qualify for the premium assistance, but they were in a fix. They're in a real pickle out there. Under our plan, because it's not income-based, it's based on age, they would qualify for the credit, and they could use it for a plan just like that. So it ties, I think you're dead on, and it's exactly the sorts of things we envision with this plan. Sure, right here, and then I'll come to you.
I like your ideas. The one question I have relating to the pre-existing conditions, you mentioned, I just read you mentioned the high-risk pool. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a little bit how that would work and how? Well,
the federal government would set it. We would empower it in terms of oversight and would be set at the state level as opposed to the federal level. So states would be able to see health insurance in general, but it would allow states like Minnesota, like Wisconsin, to do some of the programs that we've done in the past, which would allow for that. This just empowers that. In our case, in Wisconsin, for example, and other states, we weren't allowed to do that. We had to change out of that because of Obamacare. This restores that kind of freedom as one more option.
Governor, one of the areas that we see out of control increases is in the pharmaceutical side of the healthcare industry. What do you see that we could do to change the way that, is there a happy medium that could still encourage innovation, yet at the same time cut back on some of the crazy costs that we're seeing for new drugs?
Yeah, I think as it ties into each of these categories, when you see the marketplace now being more active in a competitive sense, whether it be from insurers, healthcare providers, others within the marketplace, that would play a key role in encouraging lower cost because people would have a greater hand. I mean, even putting more money in the HSAs, for example, the more people have the ability to watch where their healthcare dollars are spent, the more they're going to hold those entities accountable. I often think if all of you here, if you took out your cell phones, most of us probably know more about our cell phone plans than we know about our healthcare plans. That's because just the way the system is. It hasn't been in a way that's very attentive to people managing what they're doing and how they're doing it. And so I think that would open the door. The other part, even a little tweak in terms of putting incentives in for states to do lawsuit reform would even help in terms of pharmaceuticals, because a huge cost that they and other healthcare professionals have is trying to offset frivolous lawsuits, particularly high in that industry. This would encourage states to put in place reasonable, responsible reforms that would help lower those costs as well. Sure.
First of all, thanks for coming to Minnesota. My question is more on salesmanship of your plan. It seems like a great plan. I lived in England and I had an NHS number, so I know what it does to a country with government-run healthcare. How do you sell your plan so that you're not just the big bad Republican taking away people's health insurance under Obamacare?
Well, I think the one thing that has been interesting in the last few years, because I was out front in this, like I said, I came out against this when I ran in 2010. It was part of my frustration. It's why literally moments after I took my oath, I turned to my Attorney General, or the Attorney General of Wisconsin, and gave him the authorization to join the federal lawsuit against Obamacare, and it's why I took the other actions on not doing the state exchange and not doing the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. And so I was kind of out front on that, and early on, I think some people were concerned about. What I found over time here, and I think talking to you, Kurt, and some examples you mentioned, others out here, is that people are increasingly frustrated. There's an overwhelming sense that Obamacare was not what it was promised. I think if it had done everything, I'd still have concerns about it, but it would be a lot harder battle from a strategic standpoint. But when the American people were told things like, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, and that ended up being not just me saying it or the Republican Party saying it, but PolitiFact saying it was the lie of the year. When people have heard all the other sorts of promises, when they were told that this was affordable. I mean, I think, and I looked at one of the numbers here in Minnesota, for young people, I think there's something like a 19% increase in premium costs for younger people, younger employees here in the state of Minnesota, just under the Obamacare state exchange. So the more people have seen, the more people have looked into this, the more I think everyday Americans are saying Obamacare has not lived up to its expectations. The key, though, is why we've laid it out. It's not enough to just say you're against Obamacare. What you got to do is show what you're for and why that's better. Why this is a better alternative is that, one, it cares for people with pre-existing conditions. It helps people who don't get their health insurance from their employer. It allows for those high-risk pools and components like that. It allows for farmers and small business groups and others to pool together and purchase their health insurance. It provides for all these great options, but it doesn't dictate it through the government. That's the difference. Ours is about freedom. I think in general, not just when it comes to this health care plan, but overall, the contrast between me and Hillary Clinton is pretty simple. Hillary Clinton believes in a top-down approach of government that'll tell you what to do, when to do, and how to do it. That's what we get out of Washington. We get more of the same out of her. It may be even worse than what we've gotten under President Obama. In contrast, I believe you grow the economy from the ground up in a way that's new and fresh, organic and dynamic, that says as long as you don't hurt the health and safety of your neighbor, go out and start your own career, build your own life, start your own business, do whatever you want. That's freedom. And I think most Americans out there still fundamentally believe in that essence of freedom, that they want a more free and prosperous country, and they want leaders who understand and recognize that sense that it's all about personal freedom. Now, do we want to help our neighbor who's in a little bit of trouble, he has a little bit of a challenge? Absolutely. And this does. This says, you know, if you're down and out in Medicaid, we still provide help for those, the neediest and needy out there. We just empower the states who are much better at doing it than the federal government to dictate that. We say to folks who maybe are in a position where they just started a company, they left the company and said, I'm going to start out my own. I'm going to take that risk, but I don't have access to health insurance. This gives you a tax credit to say, we're going to help you with that, but we're going to let you choose where you take those dollars. And if you want to start along with that, tap into a HSA, a health savings account, we're going to let you take that money. And eventually we're going to allow you to pass it down to your children and other family members, because for us it's all about freedom. That's why we call it the Patient Freedom Plan, because it's really about putting freedom, giving you back the freedom that's endowed in the first place by the one above, by God. It's something that's been laid out in our Constitution, but all too often the federal government's taken too much of it away. So I think in the end the point is to say Obamacare has failed America overall. It's failed individual after individual. Yes, there are some who can point to successes, but we can point to a better alternative with this plan that isn't about a federal mandate. It isn't about more federal government. It isn't about $1 trillion more in taxes. It's about giving you your money and your power back to control your own life. Sure. He's going back there.
Governor, under Obamacare, we've seen a lot of oppression of religious freedom. We've seen Hobby Lobby go to the Supreme Court, Conestoga Wagon, the Little Sisters of the Poor. We've seen all these lawsuits, nonprofits, individuals, closely held companies. What does this plan do to hopefully eliminate that?
Well, in this case, again, it puts the power back in your hands or anybody else out here to make healthcare decisions about you and your family. So it's something where it gets the government mandates out, it gets the government dictates out, and it says, here's where you can spend your money. You can spend it, particularly if, for someone, like I said, who's not getting health insurance from their employer, can take it and go out and spend it that way. But it eliminates all the mandates that were part of Obamacare. So it's really ultimately about freedom. In the larger sense, people have asked me about this before, I believe the Constitution of the United States protects our religious freedoms. I don't believe we have a freedom from religion. I believe we have a freedom of religion. Whether you're Christian or Jewish or Hindu, any others out there, that's something incredibly important for us to protect. It's why our founders were so focused in the Bill of Rights about making sure religious freedoms were a part of that, because they were oppressed in other parts of the world. So that's important far beyond just this plan in healthcare, is to make sure the next president recognizes that and not just talks about it, but has an administration and a cabinet that defends that right every single day. Great. Well, I appreciate that. We're going to be on the stump, not just all over Minnesota today with the speaker, but tomorrow in New Hampshire. I'm going to be out for a couple of days doing town hall meetings and talking about this. And I hope you would share the word, because to me, the best thing you need, people always say, how do you win campaigns? Well, it's message, manpower, and money. I put money at the end. You got to have some, but you don't have to have the most. But what's most important is having a message. And then the manpower is really men and women out there, grassroots level, sharing the message out there. So if nothing else, you can be an echo chamber to pass the word on to others about what we talked about here today. We're gonna have more of these things coming in the next couple of weeks about different issues along the way, because we really want to show people, you want to get things done, you got to have a plan. We had a plan when we came in. We started working on that plan before the election. We were working on it very specifically between the election and the day I took the oath of office. And that's why we acted on things so quickly just across the river, just across the St. Croix over in Wisconsin, was because we had a plan, we were ready to go. We weren't just talking in campaign rhetoric or promises. We actually knew that in the end, in a blue state like mine, which you all can relate to, in a blue state like mine, if I didn't do what I said I was going to do, the voters would have every right to throw me out, and they very much would have. But I've won 3 times in 4 years, not only with Republican support, but with independents, almost 11, 12-point margin amongst independents, and yeah, maybe even a few discerning Democrats. Because in the end, what I think Americans want more than ever, and they want particularly out of Washington, is they want people who are going to stand up and boldly tell them what they're going to do during the campaign, which is part of what we're doing here today. And then they want the confidence to know that that person, that candidate, is actually going to follow through on those promises once they're in office. You may look at my record and you may say I like some things and I don't like others. Hopefully you like more than not, but you may not like everything. You may like it all. But the one thing I hope people see, that even for those who don't approve with everything I've ever done, the one thing you'll never doubt is that I'm going to do what I've said I'm going to do. And for me, my interests have always been pure. The reason Tonette and I decided to run for governor in the first place many years ago was not just because we were mad and upset that our state was heading in the wrong direction. We were particularly upset because we got 2 boys growing up there, Matt and Alex. And for Matt and for Alex, it was worth it along the way. I'm glad that's the reason why we ran, because when we had the 100,000 protesters, when we had the death threats, when we had the pushback, when we had the recall, when we were targeted again last year as the #1 target in America by many of these liberal groups, it was worth it. Because in the end, it wasn't about a title or position. It was about making sure that for Matt and for Alex and for all the other sons and daughters like them, for all those others who are yet to be born, that they would grow up in a state even greater than the one we grew up in. Now, to me, more than ever, in this country, when people ask, why are you doing this? Why are you laying out these plans? Why are you going through all this hassle? It's for those same 2 reasons. It's for Matt and for Alex and for each of your sons and daughters, for all your grandsons and granddaughters, nieces and nephews, and those yet to be born. For me, it is worth it. It's worth it not just to run, but it's worth it to see those promises follow through to action. And that's why I think now more than ever we need someone from outside of Washington, a new fresh face, someone who's proven that they can actually do what they say they're going to do. That's exactly what you'll get from me if you elect me as your next president. I'd ask for your vote. I'd ask for your support. Most of all, I ask for your prayers. Thanks so much.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.